The people who love staying at home are not always weak, and that is the first lie society told you. Because the world trained you to believe that loud people are confident, that busy people are successful, that people constantly surrounded by noise, parties, attention, and validation must be winning in life. But the empath, the real empath, moves differently. They disappear from crowds not because they are broken, but because they can hear things other people are too distracted to notice. An empath walks into a room and instantly feels tension nobody admits exists. They feel fake smiles, hidden jealousy, unspoken resentment, energy shifts, manipulation, emotional hunger. And after years of carrying emotions that never belonged to them, home stops feeling like isolation. Home becomes recovery. You call it staying inside. They call it survival. Because every time an empath goes outside, they absorb pieces of people who never learned how to heal themselves. And nobody talks about what that does to the nervous system. Nobody talks about the exhaustion of constantly decoding human behavior. Nobody talks about the emotional weight of feeling everything deeply while pretending you are okay. Nobody talks about the silent fatigue of being the therapist, the peacemaker, the listener, the emotional sponge for everyone around you. So eventually, the empath disappears. Not dramatically, not loudly, silently. And the world misunderstands them. People say, you need to go out more, you're too quiet, you isolate yourself, you're wasting your life. Most people will never understand the exhaustion of being an empath because most people only hear words, while empaths feel energy. That changes everything. An empath can walk into a room and instantly feel tension before a single sentence is spoken. They can feel fake kindness hiding resentment. They can feel sadness behind forced laughter. They can feel insecurity behind arrogance. They can feel emotional chaos. And people who look perfectly calm on the outside. And after years of carrying emotions they never created, their soul becomes tired in ways sleep can never fix. This is why so many empaths love staying at home. Not because they hate life, not because they are lazy, not because they are socially incapable, but because the outside world feels emotionally violent to a nervous system that notices everything. The average person can spend hours around fake people and barely notice the emotional damage. An empath absorbs it like poison entering the bloodstream. Every manipulation, every hidden insult, every passive-aggressive tone, every jealous stare, every emotional burden people secretly dump onto them. The empath feels it all, and nobody teaches them how to turn it off. That is the tragedy. From childhood, empaths are usually trained to become emotional caretakers. They become the listener in the family, the peacemaker, the one who understands everyone, the one who notices pain nobody else sees. But while they spend years understanding others, almost nobody understands them. So they grow up emotionally overstimulated and psychologically exhausted while pretending they are fine, and eventually something inside them changes. Crowded places stop feeling exciting. Social interaction starts feeling like work. Noise becomes unbearable. Drama becomes suffocating. Shallow conversations feel painful. Because an empath is not just listening to people speak. They are decoding emotional contradictions every second. Imagine living inside a brain that constantly scans human behavior for emotional truth. That is what being an empath feels like. It is mentally exhausting. That is why home becomes sacred. Home is the only place where the empath can finally remove the emotional armor they wear around the world. No fake smiles, no forced conversations, no pretending to enjoy toxic environments, no absorbing the anxiety of strangers, no carrying emotional weight through. Bull at never belonged to them, just silence. And silence heals empaths in a way society will never understand. Because silence allows their nervous system to breathe again. Most people are terrified of silence because silence forces them to confront themselves. But empaths often crave silence because they spend their entire lives overwhelmed by everyone else. That quiet room, that locked door, that moment alone in bed, staring at the ceiling, that is not loneliness for an empath. That is recovery. That is emotional detox. That is finally hearing their own thoughts after spending all day drowning in other people's emotions. And this is where society gets it completely wrong. People assume the empath is missing out because they stay home. But what if the empath already discovered something terrifying about human nature? What if they realized most people are emotionally disconnected from themselves? Most conversations are not deep. Most friendships are conditional. Most social. Environments are built around performance instead of authenticity, and empaths can feel that instantly. That fake energy drains them faster than physical labor, because empaths are highly sensitive to emotional inconsistency. When someone says, "I'm happy," while secretly miserable, the empath feels the conflict. When someone pretends to support them while secretly competing with them, the empath feels the tension. When someone smiles in front of others but speaks with hidden bitterness, the empath notices the emotional distortion immediately. And over time, this creates psychological fatigue. The empath becomes tired of decoding dishonesty everywhere they go. So they retreat, not dramatically, not loudly, not for attention, silently, because peace becomes more important than participation. And the painful part is, many empaths feel guilty for needing this isolation. They wonder, why can't I enjoy life like everyone else? Why do people exhaust me so quickly? Why do I need so much time alone just to feel normal again? Because their nervous system processes emotional information at a completely different level. An empath is not weak for becoming overstimulated. A person who feels everything deeply will naturally require more recovery than someone emotionally disconnected from their surroundings. But the world rewards numbness. The world praises people who can tolerate fake environments without emotional consequences. Meanwhile, the empath is criticized for being too sensitive to lies, too sensitive to manipulation, too sensitive to toxic energy, too sensitive to emotional games. But maybe sensitivity was never the weakness. Maybe numbness became normalized, and this is why home becomes emotionally addictive for empaths. Because home feels honest. No performance. No masks. No emotional chaos entering their body every second. For once, their heart can slow down. Their thoughts become clearer. Their anxiety decreases. Our emotions stabilize, and something powerful starts happening in that solitude. The empath begins reconnecting with themselves. For years, they focus so heavily on understanding everyone else that they forgot to understand their own pain. But in solitude, the truth finally surfaces. They realize how many relationships drained them, how many people used their kindness, how many times they ignored red flags just to keep peace, how many emotional wounds they carried silently while helping others heal. And suddenly, being alone no longer feels empty. It feels safe. That is why empaths become fiercely protective of their personal space, because they know what emotional exhaustion feels like. They know the pain of constantly giving energy to people who never give the same love back. And once an empath experiences true peace in solitude, they stop tolerating unnecessary emotional chaos. That is when people start accusing them of changing. You became distant. You disappeared. You never go out anymore. You act different now. But what they really mean is this: you stopped allowing people to drain you. And that transformation shocks people. Because empaths spend so much of their lives overgiving that the moment they create boundaries, the world calls them selfish. But protecting your peace is not selfish. Protecting your nervous system is survival. An empath who stays home is often rebuilding themselves after years of emotional warfare nobody else even noticed. Every betrayal affected them deeply. Every rejection stayed in their mind. Every manipulation wounded them more than they admitted. Because empaths do not simply experience pain, they absorb it into their identity. And eventually they reach a breaking point where solitude feels safer than human interaction. Not because they stopped loving people, but because loving people too deeply nearly destroyed them. There comes a moment in every empath's life when something inside them breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way the world notices, but internally everything changes. It usually happens after years of overgiving, over-explaining, over-loving, over-forgiving. After years of being the person who showed up for everyone while nobody truly showed up for them. And one day the empath wakes up emotionally exhausted and realizes a painful truth. The more they chased validation, the more people controlled them. That realization changes everything. Because empaths spend most of their lives believing love must be earned through sacrifice. So they become addicted to proving their worth, helping everyone, saving everyone, understanding everyone, fixing everyone, even when nobody fixes them. And toxic people recognize this immediately. Manipulators are naturally drawn to empaths because empaths have hearts that struggle to give up on people. An empath will sit for hours trying to understand someone who only came to use them. They will make excuses for, disrespect, defend people who hurt them, carry guilt for problems they never created. Because empaths confuse self-sacrifice with love, until solitude enters their life. That is where the transformation begins. Because silence forces the empath to confront something terrifying. Who are you when nobody needs you? That question destroys the old version of them. For the first time, they stop running toward distractions. They stop trying to rescue broken people. They stop chasing approval from emotionally unavailable individuals. And suddenly, all the emotional energy they gave away for years starts returning back to them. That is why solitude becomes powerful. Not because isolation magically changes a person, but because distance exposes truth. The empath finally sees how many relationships survived only because they tolerated disrespect. They realize how many people loved their usefulness, not their soul. They realize how often they abandoned themselves just to avoid abandonment. We enter from others, and once an empath sees this clearly, they can never become the same person again. This is where their emotional power is born. Because the empath who learns to enjoy being alone becomes extremely difficult to manipulate. Why? Because manipulation depends on emotional hunger. People control you through your need for validation, your fear of rejection, your fear of loneliness, your desperation to feel chosen. But solitude destroys desperation. The empath who becomes comfortable alone no longer tolerates fake love just to avoid emptiness. That changes their entire energy. Suddenly they stop begging people to stay. They stop over-explaining their emotions. They stop chasing closure from people incapable of honesty. They stop shrinking themselves to make toxic people comfortable. And the world notices the difference immediately. Because there is something intimidating about a person who no longer needs constant approval. Especially an empath. Because empaths are naturally warm, naturally giving, naturally emotionally available. So when they finally become selective with their energy, people become confused. You changed. You became cold. You act distant. They became aware. There is a massive difference. The old empath believed kindness meant endless access. The healed empath understands boundaries are necessary for survival. And this is where solitude becomes dangerous in the best possible way. Because in solitude, the empath begins studying human behavior instead of emotionally drowning inside it. That quiet time alone sharpens their awareness. They start noticing patterns they ignored before. Who only contacts them when they need emotional support? Who disappears when the empath needs help? Who subtly competes with them? Who drains conversations? Who manipulates through guilt? Who uses kindness as a strategy instead of sincerity? The empath starts seeing people clearly, and clarity is power. Most people move through life unconsciously repeating emotional patterns. But solitude forces the empath into deep self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of the most psychologically powerful things a human being can develop. Because once you understand yourself, people lose the ability to define you. The empath begins realizing, I was never hard to love. I was surrounded by emotionally unhealthy people. I kept abandoning myself trying to keep others comfortable. I confused being needed with being valued. That awakening changes the nervous system itself. The empath becomes calmer, less reactive, more observant. Instead of instantly emotionally attaching to people, they study behavior first. Instead of ignoring red flags, they trust their intuition. Instead of overgiving immediately, they protect their energy until trust is earned, and suddenly toxic people lose access to them. This is why some people become uncomfortable when an empath heals, because wounded empaths are easier to manipulate. Wounded empath constantly seeks reassurance. A healed empath seeks peace. that is a completely different person. The healed empath no longer panics when someone pulls away. They no longer destroy themselves trying to keep everyone happy. They no longer chase people who create confusion, because solitude taught them something powerful. Peace feels better than emotional chaos pretending to be love. And once an empath experiences real peace, noise becomes unbearable. That includes emotional noise, drama, mind games, inconsistency, manipulation, attention-seeking behavior. The empath who once tolerated all of it suddenly walks away silently. No argument, no revenge, no performance, just distance. And that silence becomes terrifying to people who depended on controlling them emotionally, because emotionally independent people are hard to control. The empath finally understands that loneliness never truly came from being alone. Loneliness came from being surrounded by people who never truly saw them. That realization is life-changing. It teaches the empath that solitude is not emptiness. Solitude is where identity is rebuilt. It is where confidence becomes internal instead of dependent on applause. It is where self-respect grows stronger than attachment. It is where intuition becomes sharper than people's excuses. And this transformation creates a completely different energy around the empath. They stop forcing conversations, stop chasing attention, stop performing for acceptance. Their silence becomes stronger than words, because they finally understand their value does not decrease just because someone failed to appreciate it. That mindset creates emotional freedom, and emotionally free people are dangerous to toxic systems, because society profits from insecurity. Insecure people buy approval, chase trends, stay in toxic relationships, abandon themselves to fit in. But the empath who became comfortable alone, that person becomes nearly impossible to emotionally enslave, because they discovered something most people never will. The moment you stop needing everyone, you finally start finding yourself. The most dangerous thing that can happen to an empath is not heartbreak. It is what happens after too many heartbreaks, because every betrayal changes them a little. Every disappointment makes them quieter. Every manipulation makes them more guarded. Every moment of being misunderstood pushes them further away from the world. Until one day, the empath who once loved deeply starts disappearing emotionally. And almost nobody notices it happening in real time. At first it looks harmless. They spend more time alone. They stop replying as quickly. They avoid crowds. They cancel plans. They choose silence more often. People assume they are recharging. But sometimes the empath is not healing. They are hiding. That is the line nobody talks about. There is a massive difference between peaceful solitude and wounded isolation. Peaceful solitude restores the soul. Wounded isolation slowly convinces the soul that human connection itself is dangerous. And empaths are especially vulnerable to this because they feel pain so deeply. The average person may recover from betrayal and move on quickly. But empaths replay emotional wounds in their minds for years, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they desperately try to understand what happened. They analyze conversations, expressions, energy shifts, moments they ignored, red flags they excused, words they should have never trusted. Their brain becomes a battlefield of emotional memory. And after enough pain, the empath stops seeing isolation as temporary. They start seeing it as safety. That is where the danger begins. Because the wounded empath slowly creates a psychological prison that feels like protection. They tell themselves, people always disappoint me. Nobody understands me. It's safer to stay alone. I don't need anyone. But deep down, that is not peace speaking. That is pain trying to prevent future pain. And pain is convincing when you are emotionally exhausted. Especially for empaths who spent years giving love to people who only took from them. These are the people who answered every late-night call, who forgave endlessly, who stayed loyal while being neglected, who carried relationships emotionally while the other person barely tried, and eventually they reach emotional burnout, a point where their nervous system no longer associates connection with love. It associates connection with danger. That changes the entire personality of an empath. The warm person becomes distant. The expressive person becomes silent. The hopeful person becomes emotionally numb, not because they stopped caring, because caring hurt too much. And this is the terrifying part. The empath often mistakes emotional shutdown for healing. They think, I'm finally protecting my peace. But true peace does not make you emotionally dead inside. True peace does not destroy your ability to trust. True peace does not make you fear vulnerability. True peace does not convince you to disappear from life completely. Healing creates boundaries. Pain creates walls. And many empaths accidentally build walls so high that even healthy people can no longer reach them. That is the tragedy, because not everyone is toxic. Not everyone is manipulative. Not everyone wants to drain them. But wounded empaths stop seeing individual people. They start seeing humanity itself as emotionally unsafe. And once that belief becomes deeply rooted, isolation becomes addictive. The empath begins avoiding opportunities for connection before anyone even has a chance to hurt them. They stop opening up, stop meeting new people, stop expressing their real emotions, stop allowing themselves to be seen. Because invisibility feels safer than rejection. But safety is not the same thing as living. That is what many the HTs eventually realize in the middle of their loneliness. You can protect yourself so much that you accidentally disconnect from your own purpose. Because empaths were never meant to become emotionally empty. Their sensitivity was never a curse. It was a gift given to them in a world emotionally starving for authenticity. Empaths can make people feel understood in ways therapy sometimes cannot. They can create emotional safety, depth, warmth, human connection. But after too much pain, they start burying that gift to survive, and the world loses a part of them. That is why wounded isolation is so dangerous. It slowly convinces beautiful souls that hiding is wisdom, but hiding forever destroys identity. The empath begins living physically alive but emotionally absent from life itself. Days blur together. The room becomes smaller. The silence becomes heavier. And eventually the empath realizes something heartbreaking. They escaped toxic people, but they also escaped joy. Because healing was never supposed to turn into emotional imprisonment. Yes, boundaries are necessary. Yes, protecting your energy matters. Yes, some people absolutely deserve distance. But isolation should heal your spirit, not erase it. And this is the moment where the empath faces their greatest psychological battle. Not the battle against narcissists. Not the battle against toxic people. The battle against their own fear of being hurt again. Because deep down, many empaths still crave connection. They crave someone emotionally safe, someone honest, someone calm, someone who does not manipulate vulnerability, someone who does not punish sensitivity. But after enough pain, hope itself becomes frightening. Because hope requires risk. To love again is risk. To trust again is risk. To be emotionally seen again is risk. And wounded empaths become addicted to emotional control because control feels safer than uncertainty. But real connection has always required vulnerability. Why healing is not becoming emotionless. Healing is learning how to remain open without abandoning yourself. That changes everything. The healed empath still loves deeply, but no longer ignores red flags, still cares deeply, but no longer sacrifices themselves for acceptance, still connects deeply, but no longer confuses chaos with passion. That is emotional maturity. And once an empath reaches that level, they stop running from people. They simply become selective about who enters their inner world. Because they finally understand solitude was never meant to become a hiding place forever. It was meant to become a place of rebuilding, a temporary sanctuary where they could reconnect with themselves after years of emotional exhaustion. And when they truly heal, something powerful happens. Their sensitivity returns without weakness. Their kindness returns without self-destruction. Their warmth returns without desperation. They stop fearing connection because they learn the difference between healthy love and emotional addiction. That is when the empath becomes unstoppable, not because they became cold, but because they learned how to protect their heart without shutting down their soul.